Hello everybody and welcome to the MLittleProgramming tutorial. In today's video we're going to be looking at while loops, what while loops are, how to use while loops, when to use while loops and what separates them from a for loop. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this type of content. Let's jump straight into it. In Python there are two types of loops that you can choose from, for loops and while loops. In the last video we looked at for loops. Now you may be wondering when to use for loops and when to use while loops. Generally, you want to be using while loops when you don't know when they're going to end and how long they're going to run for. Then you want to be using for loops for when you do know when they're going to end. For example, if you're doing an exercise, say running, and you want to know how far you can run, you could define a while loop that says, while not tired, keep running. This way, whilst you're not tired, the while loop will keep executing, and until you get tired, then it will stop executing. For loops, on the other hand, you need to define an endpoint or a range, so you need to say something like, if the distance is less than 10 miles, keep running. So to sum up, for loops are better if you know something, while loops are better if you don't. So let's hop into PyCharm and look at the syntax of a while loop. To declare a while loop, we use the while keyword. PyCharm changes the colour of the while keyword, as it is a reserved word in Python. After the while keyword, we declare our condition. For this first example, we're just going to use the boolean value true. Then to tell Python that we've finished declaring a while loop, we place a colon. After the colon, we want to define the body of our while loop, or what we're going to execute when the while loop is run. So we go on to the next line, following Python's indentation rule of 4 spaces. Inside the body of the while loop, we're going to place the print statement, print MLittleProgramming. Note, this is not good coding practice to write code like this, and I'm about to explain why when I run this. What happens when we run this is that because our condition to re-enter the while loop is the boolean value of true, of course this will never fail and will keep printing MLittleProgramming forever. This is what is called an infinite loop, and you should be careful to avoid these in your code. If you're experimenting with while loops and end up with an infinite loop, you can just end the process in PyCharm by pressing this stop button just here. That was the most basic form of a while loop. Let's now get on to looking at while loops that don't end up with infinite loops. We'll start off by showing how to replicate a for loop using a while loop. So let's look at an example from the for loop video. I'll link that video in the top right now and in the description down below. Let's just count from 1 to 10. Now, unlike with the for loop, we can't define our variable within the declaration of the loop. We have to define a variable before the loop declaration. So we'll define our counter variable as I and initialize it as 1. Now we can declare our while loop. So while I is less than or equal to 10, colon, then print I, our counter, and then increment I by 1, each iteration of the while loop. To increment I by 1, we can either say I equals I plus 1, or we can say I, then a plus followed by an equal sign, then the amount we want to increment by, so 1. We're going to use the latter as it's easier to read. Let's run that and we'll see that we can print all the way from 1 to 10, and then when I reaches 10, we no longer meet this while condition, and therefore the while loop exits. At the start of the video, I mentioned that while loops are good to use when we don't know when the end of the loop will be. Let's now create a while loop where we don't define the end of the loop within the while loop declaration. Let's go back to the running example. We'll create a variable called tired, which is going to be a boolean value that we're going to initialize to false. Then we want to create a second variable called health, which will initialize to 10. In our while declaration, we're going to say while not tired. This is where I think Python's readability becomes really useful. In other languages, we'd have to make a statement like while tired equals false, but Python allows us just to use the implied logic from the name of our boolean value, so we can just write while not tired, which is almost exactly like the English equivalent. Then, in our while block, we're going to first decrease health by 1 each time we're in the loop. Now we need a way to change the status of the health variable whilst we're iterating through the loop. We're going to declare an if statement above where we are decreasing the health by 1. If you want to learn more about if statements, there is a video about that in this series. I'll put a link in the top right now and a link in the description. The if statement is going to ask if health is less than 2. If the health is less than 2, then we're going to set tired to true. We're also going to put some print statements in the while loop so that I can explain what is going on when we run this program. We'll put 1 as we enter the while loop, 1 printing our health variable on every iteration, and 1 when we enter the if statement. Let's run that and I'll explain what's going on. So we enter the while loop and we don't meet the criteria of the if statement. So we move on and decrease the health by 1. So health is now 9. We then come back up to this while condition and ask if we are not tired. And that is true because the health variable hasn't been altered yet. So we enter the while loop again and reach the if statement, asking if the health is less than 2. but of course that still isn't satisfied because health is 9. So we skip over the if statement and reduce the health variable by 1. The loop continues in this way until, as you can see, health equals 1. When health equals 1, we now satisfy the if statement and we can enter the if statement. This means we print inif and tied is set to true. Python still reads the health minus 1 line and we execute it, so health at this stage would be 0. But that doesn't matter to us in this case, because when we come back to the top of this while condition, we are now tied and therefore we do not enter the while loop. Okay, so now we have this while loop that has a single condition and a body. We're now going to make this while loop a bit more complex by adding in another condition. In this while loop, we're now also going to check for the distance we run. So our while loop is going to be something like, while we are not tired and we run less than 10 kilometers, then keep going. So you can imagine this as if we were training to be able to run 10 kilometers. Obviously in this example, our goal would be not be tired before we've reached 10 kilometers in distance, and this while loop checks that. To implement this, we're going to define another variable above the while loop called distance, which we're going to initialize to 0. We can then go into the while loop condition before our colon, adding the word and. Again, making use of Python's similarity to natural language. We can then type a second condition. So we're going to type distance less than 10. Then, inside the while loop, we're going to want to increment this distance. We're going to increment the distance by 2 kilometers for every iteration of our while loop. We're going to print the distance, like with the health variable, on every iteration of the while loop. So if you run this program again, we'll see that we enter the while loop and we don't meet the if statement criteria, so we move on and decrease the health by 1, so health is now 9, but increase the distance by 2, bringing the total distance to 2. We then come up to the while condition and ask if we are not tired, and this is true because we haven't altered the tired variable yet. We also haven't run 10 kilometers yet, as we've only run 2. So we enter the while loop, and again reach the if statement asking if health is less than 2, but of course that isn't satisfied yet, because health is 9. So we skip over the if statement and reduce the health variable by 1, and increase the distance run by 2, bringing our total distance run to 4. The loop continues in this way until, as you can see, the distance variable equals 10. So now we have a while loop with 2 conditions and an if statement. Let's now look at nested while loops. We're going to do a simple nested while loop, and then we'll come back to this while loop to show how they can be used in more complex examples. So what is a nested while loop? A nested while loop is when you define a while loop inside a while loop. This can be useful, for example, when you've got 2 different counters that you need to manipulate. What you have to be careful with nested loops is that you don't create an infinite loop. So we're going to create 2 variables, I and j. These are going to be 2 counter variables. We're going to initialize both of these to 0. We're going to define our outer while loop as while I is less than 10. Inside this outer while loop, we're going to increment I by 1. Then, on the same incrementation level, we're going to define our inner while loop. The inner while loop is going to run while j is less than 2. Inside the inner while loop, we're going to increment j by 1. Next, outside the inner while loop, but still inside the outer while loop, therefore on the same indentation level as the inner loop declaration, we're going to reset j to 0 on every iteration. I'm also going to add 2 print statements so I can explain what's going on when we run this. So what happens when we run this while loop? As you can see, we enter the outer loop, incrementing I by 1. Next, we enter the inner loop. We iterate through this loop until j is greater than 2, so we iterate through this loop twice. Once j is greater than 2, we exit the inner while loop, moving on to the next line where we reset j to 0. We keep iterating through the while loops in this fashion until I is no longer less than 10, so 10 times. Let's get onto a more complex implementation of nested while loops, and that is this running example. We're going to count the amount of steps we're doing per amount of distance. We're going to say that there are 1,000 steps in a kilometre. So inside this while loop that is currently checking if a runner is tired, we're going to add another while loop. This while loop is going to add a step to our total number of steps for every iteration of the inner while loop. So to set this up, we're going to create 2 new variables, one steps variable that is going to track our current steps within this distance, and total steps, which is obviously going to be our running total. So we'll create an inner while loop that says, while steps is less than 1,000, keep going. Inside this while loop, we're going to add 1 step to our running step counter, and 1 step to our total step counter. This differs from the first nested loop example. This is because in this example, we don't have to reset our counter when we leave the nested while loop, as we're using the steps counter to decide if we should re-enter the loop or not, and a separate total counter that we are actually using to work out how many steps we're on, but that doesn't impact the while loop logic. We'll add a few print statements in the outer loop so that we can see the total steps and distance going up as the while loop runs. So if we run this now, and we see that as we run this while loop, the steps is increasing along with the distance. And that just about wraps up this video on while loops. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you got a lot of value from it. If you would like more Python programming tutorials, there is a link in the top right now, and a link in the description down below to a playlist of Python programming tutorials. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, please drop a like as it really helps the channel, and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you've got any questions, drop a comment down below and I'll get back to you.